It started one night when I caught her in the act of something I never expected, something I didn't want to believe. I walked into the living room, expecting to have a quiet evening like we always did, maybe watch some TV, chat about our day. But there she was, phone in hand, talking to someone in a hushed voice, too hushed. She immediately snapped the screen down when she saw me, a smile too wide and fake to hide her discomfort. I'm not the kind of man to ignore things like that, to let small signs pass by without questioning them. I've spent enough time working in sales, negotiating deals, watching people's faces, their expressions. You learn when someone is hiding something, especially when it's your wife. I stood there for a moment, just staring at her. No greeting, no casual question, just silence. Claire was always a smooth talker, always quick with a response. But tonight she was anything but smooth. I could feel the change, the way she shifted her body, the nervous little laugh that followed the awkward silence. She wasn't fooling me. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, more forceful than I meant to, but I didn't care. I wasn't about to let this go. Not now. Not after everything. "Just a friend," she said, but her eyes darted away. She never looked me in the eye when she lied, and I knew that better than anyone. There was a pause, just long enough to make me suspicious. "You know someone from the book club?" I didn't buy it. That book club had been a staple for years, and she'd never acted like this before. A feeling started to creep into my chest, a feeling that wasn't anger, but something colder. I was being played. I didn't push it further that night. I should have, but instead I walked away. Something told me this wasn't a battle to fight in the heat of the moment. I had to get the whole picture first. And over the next few weeks, I began to watch more closely. The signs were there, little things that didn't add up. There were late nights she couldn't explain, a sudden need for me time, a shift in her tone when she spoke to me. Her texts and calls were increasingly private, and her routine, the rhythm of our life together, had become erratic, unpredictable. I could feel the distance between us widening every single day. I didn't let it fester in silence. I wasn't going to sit back and play the role of the oblivious husband, the guy who was too naive or passive to confront the truth. I wasn't going to let her play me for a fool. So, I did what anyone in my position would do. I kept my eyes open and started gathering evidence, making sure I had everything I needed. I wasn't going to let her spin this into something I couldn't confront. Now, I'm not a man who's quick to make waves, but I'm also not the kind of guy who ignores his gut when it's telling him something's wrong. I'm a retired businessman, spent over 30 years in the corporate world, and I'm used to spotting the lies people tell, the subtle shifts in behavior, the way their eyes shift when they're about to deceive you. And Claire, for all her charm, was no exception. She had always been the life of the party, the social butterfly. We made a great pair. I was steady and calm, while she brought the energy, the passion to our life. I wasn't one to jump to conclusions or make a scene, but damn it, I wasn't a fool either. We met in our 20s back when life was simple. I was a rising star in a tech company, focused on business, trying to climb the ladder. Claire was the bright, bubbly woman in the office who had everyone laughing. She had a way of drawing people in. We hit it off from the start, and before I knew it, we were married. The years went by, and we built a life together, a good life. No kids, just the two of us. We traveled, we laughed, we argued over the small things, but overall, we had what I thought was a solid marriage. I worked long hours, built a decent career, and Claire had always supported me. Or at least I thought she did. When I retired a few years ago, I thought things would slow down. That's when I began to notice the subtle changes in her. At first, it wasn't anything major, just little things here and there. She started taking these long walks on her own, saying she was clearing her mind or taking time for herself. I didn't think much of it then. People need their space. But when I started noticing her behavior shift, more phone calls, late nights avoiding certain topics, it became clear that something was going on. We still had our routines. Saturday mornings were for the farmer's market, Sunday afternoons at the lake. But then Claire started avoiding those things. "I'm too tired," she'd say. "I've got a lot of things to handle." At first, I didn't press it, but over time, I started feeling this gnawing suspicion. I was in tune with the rhythm of our life, and it was off. The tipping point came when I stumbled on her credit card statement. There was a charge for a hotel, a fancy one in the city, on a weekend when she'd claimed to be busy with a charity event. that didn't sit right with me. I was already gathering evidence. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I didn't have the full picture yet. So, I decided to make sure I was ready. I wasn't going to let my emotions guide me blindly into something I wasn't prepared for. I watched, I waited, and I made my plans. This was a game now, and I was done being the one left in the dark. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I've always believed in taking my time, letting things unfold slowly, so I could understand the truth. But damn it, Claire's behavior was starting to speak for itself. I wasn't blind, and I wasn't a fool. The cracks in our marriage were beginning to show, and I wasn't going to let them fester while I ignored it. The first thing I noticed was the phone. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a strange shift in her habits. She used to leave her phone lying around, no big deal. We'd both check it at random, laugh at funny messages from friends, or share interesting articles. But now, she was glued to it, and not in the way someone is when they're texting their mother or a friend about a recipe. She'd lock it when she wasn't around, and when she was around, she'd make sure it was face down on the table. She started keeping it with her in the bathroom, even during short trips to the grocery store. At first, I brushed it off. Hell, maybe she had a new project at work or a new friend. But when the late-night texts started, that's when I began to feel something more sinister at play. I'm not stupid. A woman doesn't start hiding her phone for no reason, especially not after nearly 15 years of marriage. There was something going on, and I knew I needed to find out what it was. So, I did what any man would do when his wife starts acting suspiciously. I started digging. I began by checking her phone when she wasn't looking. Now, I know some people would call that wrong, but here's the thing. This was my marriage. This was my life. If she was hiding something from me, I had every right to find out what it was. And let me tell you, when I did finally get the chance to glance at her texts, I wasn't prepared for what I found. The first one was from a number I didn't recognize. It was late, well past midnight. It said, "I miss you. Can't wait to see you again." No name, no context. But the word sent a cold chill straight through me. I thought I had it all wrong at first. Maybe it was a friend from work, someone she was just joking with. But the more I dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't a friendly chat. This wasn't someone asking about a book club meeting or a charity event. This was personal. She was involved with someone who wasn't me. That night, I barely slept. I stayed up, replaying every conversation we'd ever had, every moment I thought I knew her. I thought about the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, the way she'd suddenly changed the subject when I brought up certain topics. For the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I truly knew her at all. The next day, I confronted her about the message. I wasn't subtle, and I wasn't playing nice. I walked into the kitchen while she was making coffee, and I dropped the bomb. "Who is he?" I asked, leaning against the counter, my arms crossed. My voice was calm, almost too calm. I'd learned over the years that people are more likely to lie when you're emotional. If you want the truth, you need to make them believe you already know. She froze. Her hand shook slightly as she poured the coffee, and I saw the look in her eyes, a flash of panic. I wasn't going to let her off the hook so easily. I wasn't interested in the excuses, the words she'd been practicing in the mirror. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, the words so rehearsed that they almost made me laugh. It was the same old routine she'd been using for weeks, playing it cool, denying everything, pretending like nothing was wrong. I pushed harder. "The text, Claire. Don't lie to me." She set the cup down, taking a step back, her face pale. "It's nothing, just a friend. I swear, it's nothing to worry about." I saw right through it. Her words didn't even sound real. She was still holding on to that phone like it was her lifeline, like it was her last defense. She wasn't fooling me. I didn't let her off easy. "Don't lie to me," I repeated, this time with more force. "You've been hiding something, and I'm not going to pretend I don't see it." "Who is he?" There was a long pause, an uncomfortable silence that stretched between us. And then, finally, she broke. I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice weak, defensive. It's complicated, all right?" "Complicated?" I repeated, the sarcasm slipping out. "You're telling me that complicated is what you call cheating?" She looked down, avoiding my eyes, the words not coming. I felt a pang in my chest, but I wasn't going to back down now. I wasn't going to let her turn this into some pathetic sob story. His name's Ryan, she said almost in a whisper. I've been seeing him for a while now. At that moment, the world seemed to go still. I stood there, staring at her, my mind racing. I couldn't believe it. Ryan. I knew Ryan. She'd mentioned him in passing a few times. He was just some guy from her yoga class. A friend, she'd said. But now I knew the truth. This wasn't just some innocent friendship. She'd been lying to me for months. I was done pretending I didn't know what was going on. Claire's lies had built up over weeks, months, maybe longer. It didn't matter. What mattered now was that I wasn't going to stand there like a fool while she tried to make it sound like this was all some kind of misunderstanding. I wasn't going to let her play me anymore. You've been seeing him? Behind my back? My voice was low, but the anger was there, simmering just beneath the surface. I could feel my pulse quickening, my fists clenching. But I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I just let the silence stretch between us, heavy and thick, until she felt the weight of what she'd done. Please listen to me, she pleaded, her voice cracking. I never meant for you to find out like this. I don't know what happened. We started talking more, and one thing led to another. I never wanted to hurt you. I couldn't contain my frustration any longer. I slammed my hand against the counter. You think that's an excuse? You think that is going to make it okay? She flinched, her eyes welling up with tears. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I shook my head. Don't apologize to me. You're sorry you got caught, not sorry for what you've done. She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. You've been lying to me for months. You've been sneaking around behind my back, and now you think you can make it sound like I'm the one in the wrong? She backed away, clearly rattled, her shoulders shaking with the effort to control her emotions. I never meant to hurt you, she said, her voice small now. I didn't know how to fix things. I didn't know how to tell you. I laughed bitterly. You think telling me now is going to fix it? Do you think I'll just forgive you? You've been sleeping with another man behind my back, Claire. Her eyes darted around, as if looking for an escape. I didn't know what else to do, she whispered, the guilt now bleeding through. I felt neglected, and he understood me in a way you didn't. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Neglected? I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. You've been my wife for over a decade, and this is how you repay me? By sleeping with someone else? That's what I get for all these years of loyalty. The silence between us was deafening. I wanted to scream, to break something, but instead, I turned away and walked out of the room. She called after me, but I didn't care anymore. I knew in that moment that everything was about to change. There was no going back from this. I couldn't pretend I didn't know anymore. And now that I had the truth, I had a decision to make. I wasn't going to be some passive man who let his wife walk all over him. I wasn't going to let her lie to me and then come crawling back with some pathetic apology. No, I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The first thing I did, I took a long walk. I needed time to think, to plan. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about teaching her a lesson she'd never forget. I spent the next few days in a state of cold clarity. It wasn't the anger that drove me. It was something much deeper. Betrayal is a unique kind of pain. It doesn't hit you like a punch to the gut at first. No, it starts slow, like the drip of water over a stone, wearing you down, wearing you thin until you feel like you're suffocating in it. But I wasn't going to drown in this. I wasn't going to let her off easy either. Claire thought she could play me for a fool, thought she could get away with this. And I wasn't about to let that happen. Not for a second. I didn't jump into action immediately after she admitted to seeing Ryan. I needed to think, needed to craft a plan. I wasn't some rash fool looking to burn everything down out of blind rage. No, I was far more methodical than that. I wasn't going to just hurt her emotionally. I was going to hurt her in every possible way. I wasn't going to destroy her. No, that would be too easy. I was going to dismantle everything she'd taken for granted. The first thing I did was start putting together the pieces. I began gathering evidence. That credit card statement was a big help. I'd already known about the hotel charge, but I hadn't yet figured out the specifics. That night, I drove over to the hotel. It was a fancy place, too fancy for her to stay at without a good reason. She'd always been careful to avoid hotels like that, especially after she'd complained about the price once when I'd suggested it for a vacation. That was a red flag. So I went in, asked the front desk for the guest register under her name, and just like that, I had the proof I needed. She'd stayed there with Ryan. It wasn't some business trip or girls' night out. It was an affair, plain and simple. I needed to know more, though. I needed a paper trail, something solid I could use against her. I couldn't let her get away with this. The next day, I used her phone to check the bank account. She hadn't been as careful as she thought. I found more than a few entries I didn't recognize, spending on dinners, expensive wine, and even a weekend getaway with Ryan. She'd been covering her tracks, but not well enough. Every little slip-up was a piece of the puzzle, and I was starting to see the full picture. I'd let her keep playing her little game for as long as she thought she could. Now it was time for her to realize who she was up against. I'm not an impulsive man. If anything, I pride myself on being patient, strategic. I'm not the kind of guy who lets his emotions dictate his actions. I was in this for the long haul. Claire was going to feel the consequences of what she'd done. Consequences that would touch every part of her life. And I was going to be the one to show her just how deep this would cut. The first move was to make sure she couldn't worm her way back into the family's good graces. I wasn't going to let her lie to our kids, our friends, or my parents. The betrayal wasn't just about me. It was about everyone she had ever lied to, including those who trusted her. I wasn't about to let her paint me as the bad guy here. I took my time crafting a few well-placed phone calls. A quick conversation with my sister-in-law, a call to my old friend from college who worked in the legal field, and I started getting things lined up. The divorce wasn't going to be a quiet affair. No, I was going to make sure the truth came out loud and clear. No secrets, no misunderstandings. If Claire thought she could crawl her way back with a sad apology, she was dead wrong. I also reached out to the colleagues and friends she had been close with over the years. I wasn't going to let her get any sympathy from them. I had a few quiet conversations, letting them know what had been happening behind the scenes. I wasn't going to be the one left alone in the shadows while she played the victim. I was going to make sure they knew exactly what was going on. But my revenge didn't stop there. Oh no. Claire had always prided herself on being the center of attention, the one everyone loved. I wasn't going to let her get away with making a fool of me. If I was going to get my revenge, I needed to take her down in the public sphere, where it would hurt the most. I took the hotel receipt, the phone records, the evidence from the bank account, and I laid it all out like a set of cards on the table. I wasn't just going to file for divorce and walk away. I was going to make sure she knew she'd lost everything, every single bit of respect she'd built up over the years. I wasn't going to let her walk away with her head held high, pretending everything was fine. The confrontation came a few days later, and it wasn't a gentle conversation. It wasn't something where we'd sit down, hold hands, and cry about our broken marriage. No, it was time for her to feel the weight of what she had done. I waited until she got home from her yoga class, her usual Tuesday night thing. She was in a good mood, as if nothing had changed. She smiled at me as she walked through the door, asked how my day had been, but I wasn't in the mood for small talk. "Claire," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "We need to talk." She froze, and I could tell immediately that she knew something was coming. Her face paled slightly, the nervous energy creeping into her posture. She knew I wasn't the type to let things slide. "I know about Ryan," I said, the words falling heavy between us. Her expression shifted in an instant. The fake smile, the casual demeanor. Everything cracked in that moment. Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't let her. "I know you've been sleeping with him behind my back," I continued, voice steady but cold. "I know about the hotel, the dinners, the weekends away." Her hand started to tremble, and she took a step back. I can explain." I shook my head. "Don't even try. There's no explanation. You made your choice, and now you'll deal with the consequences." She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. "Please," she whispered. "I never meant for this to happen. I don't know what went wrong. I was feeling neglected, and Ryan, he made me feel good about myself again." The words hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't let them rattle me. "You think that makes it okay? You think I'm the one to blame here?" She shook her head, her voice cracking now. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." But I wasn't listening anymore. The apology was as empty as her promises. "You did hurt me, Claire. You hurt me more than you'll ever understand. But I'm done. I'm done being the fool." Her face crumbled then, the mask slipping completely. She stepped toward me, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't bother. I've already made up my mind. You'll get what you deserve." She opened her mouth again, but this time, I cut her off. "I'm filing for divorce. And don't even think about trying to weasel your way out of it. I'm not going to be the one left holding the bag." I knew I couldn't let her walk away without facing the consequences. That's where the real fun began. First, I made sure I had all the legal documents lined up. I had a good lawyer, one of the best in the city. The divorce wasn't going to be clean, not by a long shot. Claire wasn't going to get any favors. I made sure everything was airtight. Her affair with Ryan was front and center in the proceedings. I wasn't interested in an easy settlement. I was going to make sure she knew the full extent of what I knew and make her regret ever thinking she could hide it from me. But I wasn't just playing a legal game. I was playing a social game, too. I arranged for a few key people in her life to know about the affair. I reached out to her friends, our mutual acquaintances, and even a couple of people she trusted at work. If Claire thought she could walk away from this without facing the fallout, she was wrong. And then there was Ryan. I knew I couldn't leave him out of the equation. If Claire wanted to be with him, fine, but she wasn't going to do it without consequences. I made sure he knew about the divorce. I made sure he knew about the impact this was going to have on his life. By the time the dust settled, Claire had lost everything. Her reputation was in shambles, her friends had turned their backs, and the people she'd trusted, well, they all knew the truth. I had no idea how bad things would get after that. Claire tried to reach out to me a few times after the divorce papers were filed. She apologized, cried, begged me to reconsider. But by then, I wasn't the man she once knew, the man she thought she could control. As for Ryan, he didn't even bother showing up for the fallout. He disappeared from the picture entirely. But one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same. The day after the confrontation, I felt like I had stepped into a different life. The kind of life where everything I thought I knew about my wife, my family, even myself, had been shattered into jagged pieces. The anger didn't consume me like I thought it would. No, it was more like a slow, simmering rage. A quiet, controlled fury that grew stronger with every thought of the betrayal. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to make a scene. The truth was enough. Claire had made her move, and now it was my turn to make mine. The decision was made. I wasn't going to sit back and let this go. I'd spent too many years building my life, my career, my relationships on trust. Something she decided was disposable. She thought she could keep playing this game, taking her little risks with Ryan. Lying, covering up? Well, now the tables were about to turn. I had no illusions about what the divorce would bring. I wasn't interested in a quick fix. I wasn't looking to settle and walk away with my dignity intact. I was going to make sure she felt the full weight of what she had done. Claire wasn't just going to lose me. She was going to lose everything that gave her life meaning, everything she thought she could hold on to in the wake of the affair. But I wasn't going to burn everything down in one explosive act. No, I wasn't a fool. I was going to be strategic. I was going to control the narrative. And I was going to make sure she felt every bit of her mistake in a way that would echo for years to come. The first part of my plan was simple. Strip away the things Claire cared about the most. And when I say simple, I mean it in the most calculated way possible. I'd spent years watching her, studying her. Claire wasn't the type of woman who valued personal responsibility. No, she was the kind of person who thrived on social approval, validation, and status. I knew where to hit her where it would hurt. I began with her friends, her circle. Claire had always prided herself on her reputation, on how she was seen by others. She liked being the life of the party, the one who always had a smile, a joke, a compliment ready for everyone. But she wasn't just social for the fun of it. She relied on her social network to maintain her position of power in our marriage. If people started seeing her as the cheater, the liar, well, that would shift the balance. I reached out to a few of her closest friends, people I knew well, people she trusted, or at least thought she could trust. I didn't need to tell them everything. I didn't need to give them the full, raw truth. No, that would be too easy. Instead, I gave them just enough, a carefully planted seed. I made sure they knew what was going on, but I let them piece it together for themselves. I wanted them to know, without a shadow of a doubt, that Claire had been unfaithful. That would destroy her socially, because the truth had a way of seeping out into the world, whether she liked it or not. The second part of the plan was more personal. I needed to hit her where it would matter to her the most, her relationship with her family. Claire was always close with her mother. I knew that. That connection was something she could never afford to lose. She'd been the perfect daughter for years, always eager to please her mother, always putting on a show of being the perfect wife and mother. But that was just in a show. I sent an anonymous letter to her mother, carefully worded, carefully timed, and sealed with a cold finality. I told her mother what was happening. I told her how Claire had been sneaking around behind my back with Ryan for months, how she'd stayed in hotels, lied about her whereabouts, and completely disregarded the vows we had taken. I wasn't kind in the letter. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I wanted her mother to understand that this wasn't some mistake or a fleeting affair. It was deliberate. It was a conscious choice. When I got the call from Claire's mother later that night, I was ready. She was livid, shocked, devastated. She had no idea how to react. I could hear her sobbing through the phone, but there was no sympathy from me. It was too late for that. If anything, it felt good to hear her mother's broken voice. It was a small part of the satisfaction I needed. If Claire thought she could escape the fallout of her actions unscathed, she was wrong. The financial part of my plan wasn't going to be a simple division of assets. No, I wasn't going to let her walk away with anything more than she deserved. She'd spent years enjoying the benefits of a comfortable life. Vacations, dinners, luxury clothes, while I worked my tail off to provide it all. She was living a lie, and it was time for her to face the reality. I had a few legal connections from my years in business, people I trusted, people who owed me favors. I called in one of those favors and arranged a consultation with a lawyer who specialized in high-net-worth divorces. I wasn't looking for anything cheap or quick. I wanted precision. I wanted Claire to feel the weight of her betrayal, and that meant hitting her where it would hurt most, her finances. The first step was getting a clear picture of her spending habits, her assets, and her liabilities. This wasn't about taking everything from her, but it was about leveling the playing field. I needed to make sure that Claire didn't come out of this looking like the victim, like she was the one wronged in all of this. No, she was going to lose out. I was going to make sure her savings took a hit, that her comfort was stripped away. That meant a thorough investigation into all her hidden accounts, everything I'd never known about over the years. I began scrutinizing her accounts. I knew she kept a few secret funds. She'd always been the one to handle the finances, and I'd trusted her, too much perhaps. I found a few receipts, travel expenses, lavish dinners, expensive gifts for Ryan, things that weren't just casual spending. It was clear this wasn't the type of person who was just a little lost. She had been deliberate, and now she was going to face the music. I made sure to keep it quiet for now. I wanted her to feel the pressure building, but I didn't want her to know what I was doing just yet. She tried to hide things from me for so long. I wanted her to understand that I could play this game just as well, if not better. The next step was public humiliation. I knew Claire well enough to know how much she valued her public image. Her friends, her colleagues, even the people at our local church, they all thought of her as a picture-perfect wife and mother. She'd always kept up appearances, even when it meant lying or being someone she wasn't. That was her weapon, her charm, her ability to manipulate her way into people's good graces. But that wasn't going to work anymore. I reached out to a few trusted sources, some of our mutual friends. I started letting them know that things were falling apart at home, that Claire had been cheating on me with Ryan. I didn't go into specifics. I didn't need to. What mattered was that the rumor mill started working. People started asking questions. Claire's perfect little world began to unravel, bit by bit. The whispers spread fast. Once I had a few people talking, the rest followed suit. I wasn't about to just let her go through life thinking she'd get off scot-free. By the time she caught wind of what was happening, it was too late. She could apologize all she wanted, but the damage was done. Her friends were pulling away. Her family was distancing themselves, and even her colleagues were starting to look at her with a sense of disbelief. She wasn't the same woman they thought they knew. The facade had cracked. And now it was only a matter of time before the whole thing crumbled. At this point, Claire was desperate. She reached out to me again, even showing up at my office, begging for a chance to talk, to explain herself. She said she was sorry. She promised things would change. But by now, I wasn't listening. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her empty promises. It was over. I had already started to finalize the divorce papers. But this wasn't just a clean break. I was making sure she would understand exactly what she had lost. Claire wasn't going to walk away from this with any semblance of dignity. She was going to feel every ounce of what she had taken from me. I had no intention of letting this affair be the end of my story. This was just the beginning. Claire thought she had time, but she didn't. She thought her apologies, her tears, could win me back. But there was no going back. What she didn't understand was that by the time she started begging for forgiveness, I had already made my decision. The anger, the betrayal, it had fermented into something more controlled, more methodical. I wasn't interested in getting revenge on a whim. This wasn't about hurting her in the heat of the moment. It was about teaching her a lesson she would never forget. I'd spent the better part of a week playing the quiet game, sitting with the knowledge of her infidelity while she ran around trying to salvage whatever she could. She started coming to me with lists of excuses. We've been distant. I've been stressed. I've been so lonely. Every one of her explanations sounded as empty as the last. She tried to pull on my heartstrings, but all it did was make me more resolute. "Je liet her begunsten." I let her plead, but when I spoke, it was cold, calculated. "You think you can just say you're sorry, and it'll all go away, don't you?" I said one evening, staring her down as she sat on the couch, trying to hold it together. She looked at me with those doe eyes, trying to get me to soften. "We can work this out," she said, the desperation creeping into her voice. I shook my head. "No, we're done." That's when the real fallout started. Claire wasn't the type of person who could be easily pushed out of her comfort zone. Losing me was bad enough, but what she didn't expect was the second part of my plan, taking everything else she held dear. I knew the financials had to be next. She'd lived off the wealth we'd built together. Using the status, we had to keep her in a comfortable lifestyle. She'd never been one to worry about money. Why should she? She knew I'd always handle it. But now, with the divorce looming, it was time to level the playing field. I wasn't going to be kind. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything just because she was the victim in the story she'd been telling people. The first step was the house. Our house, the one she loved so much. She'd always felt so proud of it, the manicured lawn, the beautiful interior. She didn't deserve it. I'd worked for it. She'd taken advantage of it. So, I made sure she couldn't keep it. I called my lawyer and instructed him to draw up the papers, details about the house, the car, everything. We weren't going for some easy division of assets. No, I was making sure I got my fair share, and a little more. We were going to sell it, split the proceeds, and then I'd put a clause in there that Claire wouldn't be able to afford her lifestyle anymore. This wasn't just about the house. It was about showing her how little she really had left when the comfortable world she built on my back started to crumble. But there was one thing Claire didn't anticipate. Her financial status was about to change, too. I'd been privy to the accounts she kept hidden, the ones she thought I'd never find. Over the years, she'd squirreled away money for herself, buying things I didn't know about, paying for her secret rendezvous with Ryan. I was prepared to take it all. I contacted the financial institutions where she'd stashed her secret accounts and pulled the strings to freeze everything. No more shopping sprees, no more luxury vacations. I made sure that she was left with just enough to survive. Barely. That was all she was going to get from me. She wasn't going to have her cake and eat it too. While Claire was scrambling to figure out her financial situation, I started to shift my focus to her public image. She had built a life for herself, socially and professionally, that depended on her reputation. And now, that reputation was about to be ripped apart. The whispers had already started to spread among our mutual friends. But that wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her lies, so I began planting seeds in the most damaging places. I'd always known the kind of person Claire was, outwardly charming, but deeply manipulative. She had spent years playing the role of the perfect wife to everyone who mattered, her friends, her colleagues, and especially her family. But behind closed doors, she had been different. She'd been unfaithful. and I wasn't going to let her continue pretending to be the victim. I reached out to a few of her closest colleagues, people she worked with in her volunteer organizations, the ones she liked to impress, the ones who saw her as the doting wife. I shared just enough of the story with them, not in graphic detail, but enough to get them to question her character. I told them about the affair, about the lies, about how she'd spent our money on Ryan and stayed in hotels with him, how she'd been playing a role in front of them all this time. I didn't care how they took it. Whether they believed me or not, the seed had been planted. And soon enough, the gossip started. It wasn't just at our friend group anymore. It had spilled into the office, into her social circles, even to some people in her family. The truth spread faster than I could have imagined. Claire tried to defend herself. Of course, she did. She reached out to me and begged me to stop. But the damage had already been done. Her friends were beginning to question her. The facade she'd worked so hard to build was crumbling around her. Claire's final attempt at salvaging her reputation came from an unexpected angle. She tried to play the sympathy card with our children. It was a move that might have worked with someone else, but not with me. I'd always been the strong one in the family, the one the kids turned to for stability, for guidance. Claire? She had been more of a figurehead than anything else, and now she was trying to pull at their heartstrings, asking them to side with her. I knew better. I wasn't going to let her manipulate them the same way she'd manipulated me. When she brought the kids over one afternoon, I could see it in her eyes. She was trying to act like nothing had happened. She was still wearing that mask, the one that pretended everything was fine. But when she looked at me, I could see the fear. The fear that I'd break them, that I'd break her. It wasn't that I didn't care about the kids, I did. But I wasn't going to let Claire get away with this. I wasn't going to let her pull them into her mess. I told her that the kids would stay with me, that they would have time to adjust. I wasn't going to let her drag them into this toxic situation. It was then that Claire broke down. The mask slipped, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I had once loved, the woman who had been scared to face the consequences of her actions. She begged me to reconsider, promised that things would be different, that the affair was a mistake. But I wasn't having it. It was too late. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. By the time everything was in motion, when her friends were talking, her family was distancing themselves, and her financial situation was crumbling, it was clear that Claire wasn't the same person anymore. She wasn't the woman I had married. She wasn't the woman who had promised me forever. She was the woman who had betrayed me. And now it was my turn. She could apologize all she wanted. She could beg for forgiveness, offer to work on herself. But none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that I had taken control of the situation, and she had lost. The divorce papers were final, and I made sure she understood that I wasn't going to let her get away with any part of it. The consequences of her actions would be far-reaching, and no matter how hard she tried to pull herself back together, there was no going back. In the end, it wasn't about getting even. It wasn't about sinking to her level. It was about showing her that you can't just tear apart the life you've built and walk away unscathed. And in that moment, I knew she would never forget the lesson I was teaching her. At first, I thought that would be the end of it. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. And that's when I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't the one you plan. It's the one that happens when you least expect it. When the dust had settled, and Claire was left to deal with the consequences of her actions, I took a step back and realized something important. The pain and the anger, it had faded. What I had left wasn't just relief. It was a sense of quiet peace. I'd learned that sometimes the best way to get back at the people who hurt you is simply to let go. And I did.